those in the chat facility. So today we have the wonderful Fiona Erskine with us. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Fiona. I'm just going to read it from her new book, Phosphate Rocks, which is coming out very soon, but we'll talk a little bit about that later. So Fiona is a professional engineer with 40 years of international manufacturing experience. Fiona Erskine's first graduate job was in the factory described in Phosphate Rocks. Born in Edinburgh, Fiona grew up riding motorbikes and jumping into cold water. After studying chemical engineering at university, she learned to weld, cast and machine with apprentices in Paisley. As a professional engineer, she has worked and travelled internationally and is now based in the northeast of England. Her first novel, The Chemical Detective, which was shortlisted for the Specsavers Debut Crime Novel Award in 2020, was followed by The Chemical Reaction. So, welcome, Fiona. And can we just start off by me asking you, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Well, I think you've covered it beautifully, Pauline. I'm not sure there's much more I can tell you. What I can maybe add is I live in Teesside and I'm happily married with 2 grown-up sons. And I don't know what else to tell you, really.
So can you tell us a little bit, how did you get the urge to write a novel? Because you're obviously a very, very busy professional woman. And how do you get the time to write?
Well, I've always read, and when I was a child, I used to write lots and lots of stories, and then real life kind of got in the way in the middle. But I think that the urge to start writing again came when I was working in India. The contrast between what I was used to and the kind of completely different way that things were often done in India made me think about lots of things. Funny how being away from home makes you think about home in a different way. And I also had a bit of time on my hands because when I was in India, I tended to be there over several weeks rather than just a few days. So I had lots of ideas that I'd been jotting down. And then when I was back home in Europe, I went with my children and my husband on a skiing holiday and promptly had a skiing accident. And that resulted in some significant time off work. So for the first time in my, in 30 odd years, I actually had time to explore some of the ideas. So that's when I started writing.
That's great. And how did you get published? How did your first publishing deal come about?
So one thing is to start writing, and I've never had a problem with quantity. Quality was an issue though. The second thing is to learn how to write so that someone else wants to read. So after I churned out a lot of completely unreadable stuff, I realized that I had too much to learn about the craft, and I went and did some courses. And I'd started up with a kind of epic 150,000 word novel, which was still in a drawer. It's unreadable. And I had to go small and start learning how to do flash fiction and short stories and actually distill it down to where the words mattered. I was just full of stories. So that was really, really tough in a way, because you've got all these great ideas and you just can't see why someone else can't see what you can see in your head. But courses were brilliant. And then I started submitting to literary agents, and I was incredibly lucky. After about a year of submissions, Juliet Mushins, who's a literary agent, offered to represent me, and she found One World, my first publisher. So that was absolutely brilliant, and I was incredibly lucky. There are lots of very fine writers who write and write and write, and it can take years to find the right agent and the right publisher. And then I met Sandstone Press actually at Crime Fest in Bristol, which is a kind of book festival. And I met Keris, who works for Sandstone there, and also Sarah Armstrong, and really liked them. And then when Phosphate Rock was ready, that's when I offered it up to Sandstone, and they took it on.
That's brilliant. And how long does it actually take you to write a book, would you say?
Well, the first one took 7 years.
Oh, wow.
With a lot of stopping and starting. But since then, it's been about a book every year.
And how do you manage to fit in the writing with your busy professional career as well? I'm a little bit in awe of you, I've got to say.
Well, the secret is I don't do any housework. So I'm an early morning person, so I tend to get up quite early and write for a couple of hours before work. I'm pretty useless by the time it comes to the evening.
That's brilliant. I think I'm going to become a writer if I don't have to do any housework. It sounds ideal. So with your books, I really enjoy the way you weave in real science into the plot. How important was it to you that the basis of the plot concerned chemical engineering?
It was my driver really, and I suppose it's sort of science and engineering. I don't think we talk about it enough. We're very we love actors and writers and artists and musicians, and that's all right. But I'm not sure we always celebrate the scientists and the engineers who make the world around us kind of smooth. And we only really hear about them when things go wrong. A little bit of it, recently, just the amazing progress that's been made with the vaccine just reminds us just what a, fantastic adventure and what how hard teams of people have worked to kind of try and get us out of this pandemic. And I really wanted to write about it in a way that made other people want to read about it. So to try and use the fiction as a vehicle to kind of look around us at the world, as well as looking internally at, what makes us the people we are.
I think your books definitely do that. Did you meet any resistance from your publisher or your editor? Did they want sort of more fiction and less factual?
Well, it's quite funny. Juliet Mushens, my agent, was quite keen that I took out some of the science, and I think for good reason. She thought it would be harder to find a publisher. But my wonderful, wonderful publisher, One World, and Jenny Parrott, who's my editor, said, no, bring the fiction back in. It's bring the science back in. We want more of it. So that was really liberating, being able to kind of really stuff it full. So that was great. So it's definitely a meeting of minds.
So to get all the science in your books, is it just sort of personal experience and personal knowledge, or do you have to do a lot of research as well?
I tend to write it first, and then I do a bit of research to kind of check, check that I've got it right, or to elaborate a bit. And sometimes, research is lovely. By research, we're talking about, quite a lot of Wikipedia and quite a lot of sort of going down the rabbit holes of the links. It won't be the first article, but it's, that quite often leads you down all sorts of different avenues. So I'm also very lucky in that I've got a community of people, engineers, scientists, who I can pick up the phone to or email. And I've had some very good, clever people read bits of, I wouldn't make them read the whole thing, but read passages and just to check that I have more or less got it right. Of course, some of it is completely invented, which is a bit naughty, but I do try and explain which bits are real and which bits are not.
They do read really well, your books, and I do like sort of the mix between the two, and I don't think I've quite read anything like that. What would you say your hardest scene has been to write?
Golly, I think I don't like violence, and I particularly dislike sexual violence. Everybody, sorry, everybody dislikes that, but in books, I don't like it where it becomes almost pornographic. And so I will tend, where there are necessary violent scenes, I will tend to have them off camera, which maybe is a bit of a cop-out in that, people will find the after effects of the violence rather than writing about the violence. So, and there are times when it's probably right to write about it, and there are people who do it absolutely brilliantly. So I think I just have to work on that. But I did start off deliberately not wanting to have a series of women raped, murdered, strangled, found naked. It was very much to kind of have a bit more agency in the female characters.
As well, if I'm reading a book and it's too in your face, the violence, it really puts me off. So I don't necessarily think sidelining is a bad thing, to be honest. So your books are really, really fast paced. They move from country to country, and in the past and in the present. How on earth do you manage to know what's coming next and where it's going and keep an eye on everything?
I have Excel spreadsheets. I am a plotter. You know, I do have quite. I mean, sometimes I've got it quite well planned out, and then Jax decides to do something completely different, and you know, I just have to follow her because she's much stronger than me. So you know, sometimes I think I know where I'm going, and then the story takes me somewhere else, and that's actually a really nice feeling when that happens. You know that it's kind of working. But by and large, I'm not very good at writing in the place that I'm writing about. So I remember I had a job in Brazil, and I spent most of the time at the weekend writing about India. And I was thinking, this is daft. Why am I not writing about Brazil in Brazil? But I almost have to have it's almost the contrast, which highlights the difference. So yeah, I don't know. I've just got a funny head, and Excel spreadsheets are also very useful.
Had this vision of you with a wall with loads of bits of string on and little things, you know, like you see in the police crime rooms and things. But Excel spreadsheet is much better, much easier way of doing it. So you mentioned Jack, who's obviously your principal character. Did she come to you fully formed, or has she sort of grown over the books?
No, absolutely. She muscled in fully formed. I was powerless to resist.
And is she based on anyone you know?
Absolutely not. She's definitely an alter ego. So she's all the things that I'm not. She's tall and slim and sporty. She can eat whatever she likes and doesn't get fat. She can drink as much as she likes, doesn't have a hangover. She has, I think my love life is better. But other than that, she's definitely a kind of, not exactly what I would like to be, but she is, I admire her confidence and self-assurance and sense of kind of, you know, direction.
I do love her as a character as well. If your book was to be made into a film, who would you see playing her?
It's a really good question, but I think it would have to be somebody new, somebody unknown, someone who hasn't played anything else. I would like Jack to be an older, you know, she's a Bond age kind of woman. And I would like it to be, I think it'd be great fun if it was, you know, somebody currently completely unknown. Obviously it would make them, but
it would be fabulous. It would be a great character to play, but unfortunately I'm 4'10" and blonde and quite old as well, so hey ho, it's not me neither. So in your books, Jack experiences a lot of casual sexism. Is this something that you wanted to highlight in the field?
yeah, I've probably underwritten it, if anything, because I didn't want her to be a victim. But you know, I've been 40 years nearly in this industry, and things in many ways have got better. I remember in my first job in Scotland, and I haven't actually put this into Phosphate Rocks, but I remember somebody, you know, confronting me on a night shift and saying, I don't think it's right, you know, you women, you know, taking a man's job. And, you know, you should be at home with your wife and with your husband and children. And so I said, well, look, I don't have a husband and I don't have children. So is it all right if I come and work just in the meantime? And it was all right. But it was you knew what people were thinking. You know, it wasn't particularly pleasant, but it was open. I think what's happened now is it's been sort of pushed underground. So, you know, there are still people in very senior positions will have these conversations quietly, but never openly. So it's a slightly more difficult working environment above a certain level. I think in many businesses, you know, you see lots of capable women, but right at the top of the organizations, it's still all male.
If any of your male colleagues that have read the books rather, what have their reactions been?
They've been lovely. You know, the ones who are my friends are not like that. So, you know, I think it's sort of evolutionary. You know, but businesses have encouraged the sort of frank good behavior, which is the kind of ruthless dog eat dog, you know, stamp on each other to get up to the top. So it's almost like the sorts of people who get on. You see it in politicians too, are the people who are, you know, ruthless. So the really nice guys, and I know lots of really nice guys, are not the people that I'm writing about. It's the kind of, I think they call them corporate psychopaths.
Oh dear, that's a term and a half, isn't it? So which of your villains has kept you awake at night the most?
The real ones.
All right.
But the villains are such fun to write. You know, it's great revenge. So, you know, they don't represent an individual person that you could point to. None of these villains would recognize themselves, partly because as psychopaths, they wouldn't see, you know, they wouldn't see who they are. But yeah, they are enormous fun to write. I have to be careful. I have to be careful not to have too much fun. And that's where my editor, Jenny, is fantastic, because she kind of reins me in a little bit occasionally.
Oh, that's great. I love the idea of that. Marv, I think I'm definitely going to write a book. That's what I'm going to do
It's great
next.
fun. Oh, I recommend it. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the locations. So where do your locations come from? Because there's quite a lot in your books, as I mentioned before. We do go from one place to another. So are they places you've visited or just made up?
Almost all of them are places I've visited. Yes, I'm a bit of a disaster tourist. So, you know, whenever I'm working in a country, I'm always very interested to visit places where things have gone wrong. And I'm not a kind of vulture, but it's just you often learn a lot more from what goes wrong than what goes right. So when I was in India, I went to visit Bhopal, which was where there was a terrible chemical accident in 1984. And that kind of actually started me writing, because I was so angry that the site was still unremediated. When I was in China, I went to visit the Banqiao Dam, which was the world's greatest structural failure. You know, more than 200,000 people died when a dam burst. And very little is known about it inside China, not to mention outside of China. So I've always been, and when I was in Ukraine, I went to visit Chernobyl, the site of the nuclear accident. So I guess all of my books are kind of set around a kind of, you know, a central accident, if you like. And then I just follow where Jack takes me for the rest of the time.
That's great. There was a lovely little quote in the book trail, which said, "I always know where I'm going with my first book, The Chemical Detective. It was to Chernobyl in Ukraine. In the second, The Chemical Reaction, it is to Banqiao in Henan province, China. But I never know exactly how I'm going to get there, the cast of characters or the waypoints," which I thought was a lovely little quote. And that's exactly what you've just said. So of all the places that you've been to and actually written about, which has been your favourite place?
Quite difficult, because I think my favourite place to write about quite often is not my favourite place to be. So China is utterly fascinating to write about, but it definitely not my favourite place to work. But you know, I think better writers than me can probably write a whole novel about a beautiful beach and a gorgeous snowy landscape. But I need a kind of a factory or, you know, stuff happening, you know, to bring my characters alive. So I quite enjoy writing about places which are not places anyone would want to go on holiday. You know, where rare earths are metalled in China is the most, you know, scarred landscape. And it really isn't somewhere that you'd want to go and visit unless you were, you know, unless you had a reason to be there. So I think it's almost like the opposite, that the places I enjoy writing about, the places I would least like to spend too much time in.
So how has the pandemic impacted on your writing? Because obviously you won't be able to travel as much. Has it had a major effect?
Yeah, I mean, it's been unsettling, I think, is the, you know, the easiest term. I mean, I've been working full time like you, Pauline. I've been working full time right through it. We've all had to learn how to work remotely. Obviously, I'm incredibly lucky. I'm in employment. You know, I've got a nice warm house. I mean, there are so many people having such a tough time and so much uncertainty. For me, it's actually been lovely not traveling. I mean, you can sometimes use travel as an excuse for not doing things, so especially housework. So it is. It's been quite good to be grounded for a whole year. I think this is the longest I haven't been on an aeroplane in my life, in my adult life at least. So yes, in many ways that's been lovely. In terms of writing, it's been productive, but maybe not as productive as it would have been if I'd been sort of, you know, fully busily traveling. I'm not sure. But, you know, thank goodness, you know, touch wood, we're all healthy. The boys are healthy, and, you know, hopefully we're just coming out the other side of it now. I had my first vaccine, not last week, the week before last. So, you know, with any luck, it's the beginning of coming out of this, what's been the most awful year.
I agree. It's trying to see the light at the end of that tunnel at the moment, isn't it? And I had my first vaccine this week as well. So
Excellent.
hopefully, had to go all the way to Middlesbrough to get it, but that's a totally different story. So can you tell us a little bit about your books? I mean, obviously we've got the Chemical Detective, Chemical Reaction, and Phosphorus Rocks as well. So can you tell us a little bit about them all?
I will do my best. I'll bring them up on the screen. That's probably the easiest thing to do. Hang on. So the first book, The Chemical Detective, sorry if it's the wrong way around on the screen, is basically introduces Dr. Jacqueline Silver, who is working on avalanche control in Slovenia. And basically she blows things up to keep people safe. So she causes avalanches to keep the ski slopes clear. And while she's there, she discovers a dodgy batch of explosives, and she begins to make a complaint, begins to investigate, and suddenly finds that nobody wants to listen. She's framed for professional incompetence. She's then accused of murder. Then there's an attempt on her life. And so she goes underground to try and find out what is behind this strange batch, and that's what leads her to Chernobyl. So I won't give any more away, but that's basically the story of the Chemical Detective. The Chemical Reaction is the same character at the end of the Chemical Detective. She's in the Ukraine. She's borrowed a yacht from her arch enemy, Frank Good, and unfortunately it blows up. Well, she blows it up actually, and so she's quite badly in debt, and she's got a debt to Frank Good because she signed a contract agreeing to bring back the yacht or pay for it. So she takes a very risky contract in China, which she knows in her bones is not the right job. And when she gets there, she finds that the factory that she was meant to be investigating has actually vanished overnight. It's there one day and it's gone the next. So the rest of the story is as she tries to find out exactly what's going on. And one of her students from Teesside University, because she was a visiting lecturer at one point, one of her students who went to have a look at this factory for her has also disappeared. So she goes searching, and she joins up with a troupe of male strippers, as one does, and the adventures begin.
And what about, I was going to say, what about Phosphate Rocks?
And then Phosphate Rocks, which is coming out in June with Sandstone Press, is a sort of semi-autobiographical story. It's the story of my first ever job as a very green engineer in a Scottish fertilizer factory. And it takes the form, it's fictionalized, and it takes the form of a discovery of a body in a factory while it's being demolished. And they call upon a very experienced shift foreman, John Gibson, who is a real person, to come and try and identify who the body is by the objects that were found with him. So it's a kind of very heavy on the chemistry, even heavier than the other two books. And it's really, you know, a bit of an exploration of how factories work, or how they worked in the 1980s, and the people who work in them. It's a hymn really to the unskilled, because I hate the word unskilled. I hate it when people talk about non-essential staff or unskilled staff. You know, it's just a different set of skills. And I've worked with some people who don't have paper qualifications, who are some of the, you know, the finest fault finders and engineers that you could imagine. So I have a huge amount of respect for people with practical experience.
Can you do us a small reading from the book, just to give us a little taster?
Yeah, I shall do my best. Right. Tell you what, I'll read it on the screen, and then I don't have to hide my. So I'm going to read from chapter 2. So the demolition crew have found a body in the factory, and they've called in John Gibson to try and see if they can identify why there's a corpse in the old factory. John has a face like a well-kept grave. He arrives early one morning at Torficon Street police station, a tall, thin man with cropped grey hair and the demeanour of a professional undertaker. He's neatly dressed in polished leather shoes, grey trousers with stay-pressed seam, an ironed white shirt, blue tie, and burgundy V-neck jumper under a padded anorak. Despite the layers, he shivers in the slanting winter light and blinks repeatedly as he states his business at the counter. I've come about the SAI. A short, plump woman emerges from a side room with outstretched hand. She wears a black serge uniform with silver buttons and epaulettes, fair hair scraped back from a round face. Mr. Gibson. She smells of flowers and reminds him of summer. Aye. Detective Inspector Rose Irvin. Her handshake is warm and surprisingly firm. Thanks for coming in. He follows her up a flight of steps and waits while she recovers her breath. Outside interview room number 2, she gestures for him to enter, but he holds the door open so she can go in first. The room is furnished with a wooden table, 4 metal chairs, the furniture marooned on a sea of blue linoleum, adrift between plain grey walls, under a high barred window and a ticking clock. On the table is a manila folder. You worked at the SAI, she asks. Scottish Agricultural Industries. Aye. We found a body in the old Leith Works. John places his hands flat against the table, leaning onto it for support. Sit, she says, please. His complexion has paled from ivory to ash. His breathing is fast and ragged. She observes him closely as he sinks onto the chair. When he raises his eyes again, they are wide with shock. Who is it? We don't know yet, she says. Oh, poor beggar. She leans forward. Any idea where there might be a dead body in your old factory? No, he shakes his head. Well, until I get the autopsy results, I don't know the date of death, the cause of death, whether the victim was male or female, young or old, tall or short, fat or thin. She sits back and stretches her hands out, palms upwards. She has nice hands, capable hands. Can you help me? I can try. She opens the folder and shows John the photographs. What can you tell me? His shiver turns to a shudder. Poor beggar died before 1997. Well, why do you say that? John wrinkles his brow. Production stopped. Oh, I see. And after 1955, he adds. When production started, she frowns. A 42-year window. He nods. 42 years, his working life.
Ooh, I've got my copy. I can't wait to start to read it. Sounds fascinating. So what are you working on now, Fiona?
Well, I am working on books 3 and 4 of the Jack Silver series. Book 3 is with my lovely editor, and book 4 is swimming along.
Excellent. I think Jack must be a really big part of your life now as well, is she?
She is, yeah. She's a good mate, actually. She's great for a couple of beers.
Just sounds it. So what other authors have had an impact on your writing?
Oh, where to start? I mean, when I was sort of in my late teens, I think my first sort of serious discovery was Graham Greene. I absolutely adored all Graham Greene's books. And then later on, I discovered Lionel Davidson, who isn't very well known now, The Rose of Tibet, Kominsky Heights, a great kind of, he was an engineer and he writes thrillers, and he's dead now. Really enjoyed those. But I've always read lots, so I love, Ian Rankin, Alexander McCall Smith. I read quite widely, so sometimes I read crime, sometimes I read something more literary, sometimes I'll read non-fiction. I'm a voracious reader. More recently, I guess the people who've had quite a big influence are other crime writers and thriller and spy writers, and it's such a lovely community of people who kind of share books and share ideas, and it's very, very kind of generous. People are very generous. They know kind of how lonely it can be at times to write something and not know if it's any, if it's worth pursuing or not. So, too many to name, but I do see a couple of people here, so I won't embarrass them by mentioning. But yeah, and also my local bookshops have been fantastic at Drake, the bookshop in Stockton. Absolutely brilliant at just coming up with something and sort of saying, have you tried this? You might enjoy it. So I love, libraries when they were open. It was really nice to go into a library and actually get a recommendation from a librarian. That was fantastic. My mother-in-law was a librarian, and I think a lot of my reading actually came from her suggesting books, because she read a lot of modern fiction, and she would always pass on her books or give me recommendations.
Oh, fabulous. There's nothing we like better than giving recommendations to people. That's what we actually live for. We love it. We love it. So how did you become involved in the Northern Crime Syndicate?
Well, Judith O'Reilly approached me and asked if I'd be interested. And at first I thought they were asking me to get involved in a heist. And I had to say, no, I'm not that kind of crime person. I'm a writer, not a bank robber. But then she gave me the names of the other people, and I hadn't actually read Judith up until then, and she writes fantastic thrillers as well. So I met the other people and thought, yeah, this sounds like a lot of fun, especially in lockdown. What a great way to connect. So and they've been fantastically supportive. It's a really nice, friendly, slightly anarchic group, and if you come along to any of the Whose Crime Is It Anyway, you'll know that they're an absolute hoot. So yes, we have a good giggle together.
I keep telling Adam I want Whose Crime Is It Anyway to come to the Word when we're reopening.
Oh, that'd be fantastic.
I think it'd be brilliant.
Yeah, it's hard to do it when you don't have any audience reaction, although the chat is great. But it would be so much more fun if you could involve the audience, properly in it. Yeah, definitely.
Oh, definitely. That's on the cards, hopefully later in the year. Fingers crossed, and everything else crossed as well. So who is the most famous author that you've met?
Well, and I know she's not everyone's favourite at the moment, but my mother-in-law once got a ticket for an Edinburgh Book Festival talk with J.K. Rowling before she was famous, and when the first Harry Potter book had come out, and I went along with my eldest son, and she was magical. She was just, I remember she was completely in tune with the children. She really wasn't that interested in the adults, but she absolutely had a direct line with the children, and it was a fantastic talk. So if I can count that, then she's probably, I'm sure I can think of somebody else, but I think she's probably the most famous author I've met. We had a nice chat afterwards.
No, you can definitely count J.K. Rowling. I don't think they become more famous than her, to be honest. So don't forget, audience, if you've got any questions you want to ask Fiona, please pop those in the chat, and we're going to ask those. So we've talked about you obviously a lot as a writer, Fiona, but as a reader, what do you like to read?
Oh, I'm glad you asked me that. So I'm one of those horrible people. It drives my husband mad. I always have several books on the go at once. I don't read one. So right at the moment, my absolute recent favourite has been Captain Jesus by Colette Snowdon, which is from the fantastic Blue Moose books. And I'm sorry, I should have reversed my screen so you could see it. And I mean, it should come with a health warning that you need a very large box of tissues. But if you like a good cathartic weep, and it's beautifully written and structured, then I couldn't put it down. I had to read quite a lot of it in the bath to avoid just flooding the house. But it is a brilliant book. And I'm also reading, so I finished that one. I'm reading Luckenbooth by Jenny Fagan, which is a wonderfully weird and wonderful kind of discovery of underground Edinburgh. It's set in a tenement in the high street in Edinburgh, and it's different times and different floors, the stories of the people there. And I'm also reading some short stories by Wendy Erskine, no relation, and the short stories are called Sweet Home, and they're all about Belfast, and they're fantastic. And you see, you shouldn't have got me started. Brilliant book of poems by Claire Dyer called Yield. And on Kindle, I am reading Danny Marshall's Anthrax Island, which is cracking.
Wow, that is a lot of books on the go at the same time. I'm very, very impressed. Very impressed. And I think I'll have to look out for Captain Jesus. That one sounds really good.
It's absolutely cracking. I don't know if you've read Leonard and Hungry Paul.
No.
By Ronan Hession. Oh, that's another absolutely gorgeous book. But I think everything that Bloomers Press have put out this year has been absolutely fantastic.
So, of all the books you've ever read, which is your favourite?
Right at the moment, and I'm not saying it because she's here, it's coming out in May, I think, is The Starlings of Bucharest by Sarah Armstrong, and it follows on from The Wolves of Leninsky Prospect, which is also by Sarah. That's the book I'm most excited about, I think, this year, although there is a second close runner with Jane Jesmond's, and it's set, I think it's got Lighthouse in the title, but it's a thriller about a climber. So those are the ones that I'm really excited about this year. I think my all-time favorite book ever is probably Primo Levi's The Periodic Table, just because it was the first book I ever read that was about science, but was also a kind of just a brilliant piece of writing. So I think if I had to name one classic that I go back and read again and again, it's probably Primo Levi.
And as a child, what was your favourite book?
Probably The Hobbit by Tolkien, and then The Fellowship of the Ring. But it's a little bit cheating because it was read to me when I was very, very young. And so it was all tied up with my dad, who was a great reader and loved reading to his children. So over several years, he read The Hobbit and then the whole of The Fellowship of the Ring. So
oh, wow, that's lovely.
Yeah, that was my first. And my brother's a little bit older than me. He's 15 months older than me. So when spoiler alert, when Gandalf dies and we were all just in floods of tears, he actually crept into my dad's study at night and read forward and woke us up and reassured us that, it was all okay.
Oh, that's just so nice. Oh, I love that. Of all the characters that you've ever read or come across, is there one that you wish that you'd written, and why?
Not really. I'm hugely admiring of people who do, who I guess who bring the ordinary to life. I think that's a particular, in a way, if you've got a James Bond type character, it's actually, you don't have to work as hard as you do if you're bringing somebody who's got a quieter life. So I'm hugely admiring of people who do that. I think that one character I've always loved and thought, I wish I'd written her would be Sarah Paretsky's VI. I can never pronounce it, Varshavia. So I really enjoyed those books as kind of fun romps. But by and large, no, I'm just admiring of what you know, the characters that other people have created, and you know, some of them really stick in your mind. Another book I absolutely loved was Tabuki's Pereira Maintains, which has a fantastic reveal of a very sort of elderly, slightly cowardly character who over the course of the book kind of reveals a bit more about himself and what he's going to do. So I love those quiet, slow burns where you get a real surprise, and you come to know that character really well throughout the book.
I agree. It's building that relationship with the characters when you're reading about them, isn't it? Yeah, I'm with you on that one. We've got a question from Sarah. Hello, Sarah. Apart from the chemistry, is there anything else that you feel links your fiction and your non-fiction writing, or do you see them as separate kinds of writing? It's a good one.
It's a very good question. When I started off with Phosphate Rocks, I had intended it to be non-fiction. So I had written it really as non-fiction. You know, it was a series of kind of reminiscences, I guess, that I did through initially through NaNoWriMo. And I was quite surprised, actually, that my editor at Sandstone, Bob Davidson, decided that it would be better pitched as fiction. So I don't think I have written some completely non-fiction. So I've just published this year a book about process safety under my professional name. It's £96 a book, so I don't recommend that you rush out and buy it. It's with other authors, and I actually found it incredibly hard because there's so much referencing and there's so much checking, and it did make me think that actually I really enjoy fiction because you can escape a little bit. Non-fiction feels a bit too much like the day job. So I don't know if that answers your question, Sarah, but in an ideal world, what I'd like to do is make the chemistry exciting enough that you want to read it, but there's a story which takes you along. So I suppose, you know, in homage to Primo Levi, it's being able to kind of, I don't know, hide the greens under the tasty bits, so that I can slip in the chemistry when you're not looking.
I love that description, and I think that does sort of sum up your books as well, because you know you're reading about the chemistry and all the real stuff as well, but it's sort of buried under the fiction, which is fabulous. It's really good. So I've only got a couple of questions left for you, Fiona. So again, if there's anyone in the audience that wants to ask anything, please, this is your last chance, and I'm sure Fiona would love to answer your questions. So if you could tell your younger writing self anything, what would it be?
I think it would have to be stick with it. I mean, when I started out, I mean, I had no illusions. I like being an engineer. I like what I do. So I had no illusions that I was going to become a full-time writer. But I don't think I realized just how tough it is. And, you know, I've had it relatively easy. I know some really fantastic writers who are still, you know, only now maybe getting their first opportunities, and some who aren't. So I think persistence is incredibly important. You've got to really enjoy it. You've got to really want to do it. I think it's almost the opposite. I think I can't not do it. I think, you know, even if somebody didn't want the next Jack books, I'd still be writing them, because it's a great escape for me. And it avoids housework. So I think the advice would be, you know, just keep at it. The more you write, the better you get. The more you read, the more, you know, the better you get. So
we definitely do want the next Jack books as well, so you do have to keep writing them. I love her as a character. And my final question is, what one thing would you give up to become a better writer?
Housework.
You've already given that up. That's brilliant. Well, Fiona, it's been absolutely fabulous talking to you this evening. Before I let you go, we've got Rob Parker coming up in 2 weeks. He's our next Northern Crime Syndicate author. How would you sell Rob to our audience and encourage them to come along?
Well, Rob is an absolutely brilliant writer, and I actually listened to his first book on audio, and it opens with the discovery of, I think, 27 bodies. But Rob writes it so well that it's not, it's not one of those books where you just go, I don't want to read anymore. And I think Blackstoke, his next book, is even sort of veering into the horror as well. So he's a fantastic writer. I haven't read all his Bren Bracken books yet, but he's very productive, very engaging. He's the master of ceremonies for Whose Crime Is It Anyway? And I don't know how he keeps us all. It's like herding kittens most of the time. I don't know how he does it, but he's very able. And he's very, very funny as well. So it would be an absolute must watch, I would say.
Oh, definitely. Right. Everyone needs to get their tickets to come and see Rob, because that'll be another fabulous event. But thank you so much for this evening, Fiona. Thoroughly enjoyed it. I am in awe of you. I don't know how you fit everything into your working day, even giving up the housework. But thank you so much for coming along, and thank you everybody in our audience as well. Obviously you will have enjoyed this evening, and hopefully we'll see you in a couple of weeks' time for our next Northern Crime Syndicate event with Rob Parker. So thank you everybody, and good night.
Thank you. Good night.